Welcome and thank you for joining me for this video in our TMS video series. Our video today is on creating enrollments. How do I create enrollments? And we'll be talking through creating single enrollments, multiple enrollments, and some other options out there. Let's talk about creating enrollments. First of all, what is an enrollment? An enrollment registers a student for an instructor-led training class that is held on specific dates and times. The enrolled status on an enrollment gives a student access to the labs and course activities once the class's first session begins. We're going to be talking about creating a single enrollment, creating multiple enrollments, different places you can create enrollments. We'll be talking about different ways that enrollments can fail and showing those to you, as well as some things that the student can do for enrollments and some ways to automate enrollments. There are multiple enrollment statuses available to you. Most of them are things that you can use any way that you choose, but there are several that have hardwired coding against them. For requested, it is a status that if a student can access either a schedule or a course catalog, they can also request enrollment into a class. Canceled is for canceled students, so they will not be attending the class. Waitlisted allows you to put someone in a status that they are next in line to get into class. I'll talk about waitlisted and requested again in a moment. Approved, it could be a status you might use for saying that the payment has been made, or the approved can be used to show that the student you have is verified to be ready or accepted into class. Denied is another way of canceling someone. Denied can be a way to deny access to a user and let everybody know that they aren't just canceled, you do not want them into class. Enrolled has a special status in that it is the only status that you can use to enable the class for the students. If the student is not at the enrolled status for the class, they will not be able to launch labs or launch activities. They will not see those launch buttons. They will not appear to them. In addition, your class must be set at either scheduled or guaranteed to run for it to be considered an active class and a class that is running, so that the labs will be available and the other class activities are available when the class start time starts. Going back to requested and waitlisted, if you want to have automatic enrollment set up, you can go to your organization profile. And the way that works is you go to your organization profile and you enable it here on the Preferences tab. And it's way down under Class Settings. And it's right here for Allow Waitlisted Auto Enroll for Classes. And what this does is, when it's enabled, if your class is completely full and a student cancels themselves out of your class, it will look for the next person who is waitlisted, and if there are multiple people waitlisted based on the creation date of the enrollment, it will automatically move that waitlisted person to enrolled. If there are no waitlisted students, it will then look for requested students, and again, in the order that the enrollment was created, it will enroll that student instead. This only happens when students cancel their own enrollments. If an administrator comes in and makes a change, it will not automatically enroll a waitlisted or requested person. The administrator has to make that change themselves. In terms of billing and enrollments, you can change the enrollment status on a student to enrolled at any time before the class starts or after the class has started. You cannot change enrolled to something else once the class has started. That is because we use the enrollment status of enrolled as a billable item. If you do end up having someone who doesn't show up for class, just to be clear, if you do have someone who doesn't show up for class and they are enrolled, on the first or second day of class, you need to contact our support team and request that they cancel your student for you. Completion status will have nothing to do with billing. It's just for you to mark whether or not the student completed or is attending a class. And sometimes people think if the student has no-showed and they mark this as no-show, that it's going to stop them from being billed for that student. It will not. You need to contact our support in order to stop that billing from going through and have them cancel that student for you. To create a single enrollment, you can start from several different places. On the site administration page, on the class enrollments tile, you can create an enrollment. You can also find this from the admin menu and use it here. When you create an enrollment from site administration, neither the student nor the event is filled in for you. If I start from the class profile and I choose to create an enrollment, it's going to fill in the class because it knows what the class is, but it doesn't know who the student is, so that is left empty. Another place I can create an enrollment is from a user profile, and when I go to create a class enrollment here, it's going to fill in my student because it assumes that I'm doing this for that student. Of course, if you start from the class or from the user profile, you can always remove that user or that class and choose another. From here, I'm going to choose which class I want to put my student in. And when I hit search, I have 3 different events, and I want to put him into a class. On the single enrollment, it comes up as a requested status, and I can choose here from different enrollment statuses. I'm going to put him in as enrolled and leave the rest as it is. We'll talk about some of those things in a moment. I have created this enrollment for Student Seek. He is now enrolled in the class and ready to take it when it begins. Let's take a look at some ways that you can be prevented from creating an enrollment or adding a student into a class. If I have a class that is full, I'm not going to be able to add a student in the enrolled status, but I can add the student in another status. If I'm creating an enrollment from here, and I add him at the requested status, it would save this and allow me to create the enrollment. But if I add him at enrolled, it will prevent me from enrolling him. And I get this message that the chosen class is full. So if I move him back to requested and then save, it'll allow him in because requested is not a status that allows the student to take the labs. And to change that, you would need to be able to increase the maximum students on the class, because right now my maximum students are 4 and I could increase that. Let's take a look at what will happen if I double book a student for a class. I add Alex, student who is already booked in B class, which happens at the same time and date as A class. And I'll mark him as enrolled and then save it. Even though I removed that class conflict filter, it's still going to warn me that his class enrollment overlaps with the enrollment I'm creating right now. So I could save it or I can cancel it, whichever you choose to do. But it will warn you again that that's a problem. Let's take a look at what happens when a canceled student is you attempt to enroll them into a class. I'm going to go out and choose my canceled student. And he's available for the class, but when I choose him, it says that my student already has an enrollment for the class that I'm trying to put him in. So let's take a look at the class. And I'm going to go to the roster to take a look at this. And when I scroll down and look at the roster, and I'm looking for Quinn, I don't see him here. And this can be confusing because it just told me that I have an enrollment. But our default setting on the roster is to show all but the canceled students. So if I come back in and change that to showing me the canceled students, Then I'll be able to see that Quinn is actually registered for the class and his enrollment status is canceled. At that point, I can change his enrollment status, save it, and have him enrolled in the class again. And there he is down at the bottom now. Let's look at enrolling a student into a classroom. You can do this here on the Create Enrollment or on the roster as well. You can see I've input a student. We have the class chosen. I have them at the enrolled status. Completion status is set while the student is either attending a class or if they have completed the class, and it lets you add in whether they're attending, whether they completed it, whether they didn't complete it, maybe they came for part of the days and then didn't complete it, maybe they never showed up for the class, or perhaps there was a test attached to the class and they failed it. We're going to leave that at unknown. I have 3 different classrooms set up for this class. One is a physical classroom that is in the organization's building. Another is a remote classrooms that they have so that students that are farther away or maybe even in another city can have a seat where they can attend virtually without being at their office or at home. And then we have this virtual remote choice, which we'll look at, and it allows you to set a student as attending virtually. That would be from their office or from home. These settings have to do with automated notifications. Your settings on automated notifications allow you to send a different notification for students based on if they're attending a class in a physical classroom set up in your organization, if they're attending remotely, or if they're attending virtually, because you might have different instructions for each. I can set my student up to attend in the classroom at my organization. If I want, I can set this up as a virtual or remote. And because of that, it's going to allow me to trigger a different automated notification based on whether that student is in a classroom or not. So if they're attending remotely, this option popped up when I chose it to choose a remote classroom. And I can come out and look for a classroom. And I'm going to choose my remote meeting room here. It's my external classroom. And I can set my student up here as a student taking the class at a remote classroom. And again, this relates to automated notifications, and if you have different notifications to send based on whether they're seated in a room in your organization or seated at an external room. And lastly, I can choose to have someone set up as virtual. And if I'm choosing virtual, I'm going to leave this remote classroom choice empty and just leave this classroom as virtual remote. With the remote classroom being empty, it's going to know that it is a virtual student rather than a remote one. I also wanted to show you what would happen if I enrolled a student into a classroom that was already completely booked. So we have 2 things that limit class enrollments. I showed you the one before about the maximum students. If the maximum students in the class is met, it's not going to allow you to set someone as enrolled in that class. Another limitation we have, or restriction we have, is based on the classroom capacity. When I look at the remote meeting room that I have, its capacity is only 2, and I already have 2 students seated in it that are enrolled. So let's take a look at what happens when I attempt to enroll another student into the class, and specifically into a classroom that is full. When I save, it tells me this enrollment would cause a selected classroom to exceed maximum occupancy. And you can click OK, but it's not going to let you save that. You're always going to get that message anytime you try to save. The reasoning for this is that the classrooms that you're looking at are physical classrooms, and they're set up based on their physical capacity, so you do not want to overbook them. But if I go to the other classroom, it is open, and I can add my student there. Not only do you have the ability to create one enrollment at a time, but you also have the ability to create multiple enrollments. For multiple enrollments, you can choose one or more events and one or more students. It allows you to enroll multiples of either. I'm going to add just one event, but I could choose both and add them if I'd like to. And I can add multiple students. While the chooser doesn't have a filter here to filter out any schedule conflicts, it will fail those enrollments when you add them. Let's pick out some different students. My Erin student is already enrolled in Class C, and my Ben M student is already enrolled in D class, which is at the same time and days it overlaps with C class. And then let's find some other students to enroll. And hit OK. So this drops all of my students in at a waitlisted status. I'm going to mark them enrolled. And then I could add a note if I wanted to add notes for their enrollments, and I'm going to hit save. Now it tells me that not all enrollments were successful. See the failed enrollments list for details. And I can see here that my 3 students, Eric, Evan, and Glenn, got in okay, but student Erin is already enrolled in the class, and then Ben M was not enrolled in the class because of a scheduling conflict. So it gives you the reason, and it will not enroll students that have a conflict. Another place you can work with enrollments is from the roster. So if you go to the class and choose the roster link, you have the ability to add students here, and you can add multiple students through the roster link. This brings back that does not have schedule conflict, and so it won't show you anyone who has a schedule conflict. And I can choose as many students here as I would like. I can continue looking them up by their first and last name, find them and add them in if I would like. For instance, I can look for and add them, and then everyone that I have selected will be added into the class, right at the bottom, in fact. Dylan, Jane, Jesse, John, and Kristen Lou. So from the roster, students are automatically added as enrolled, and when you save the changes, they'll be added into the class. Remember that when you're adding students, you can add different filters. If you created a group of students through an import, you could choose the created within the last 1 hour or days, and find those users and be able to add them as a group, because you do have things like select visible on the page. Trick. Another item you can use is to add students from event. This can be helpful if you have a class you've canceled, or if you are enrolling just the same group of students into another class. Let's say that I was canceling this Class C and I needed to rebook it into the future. And I could do that just by changing the dates on the class and choosing a new date here. But if you want to keep track of classes that were canceled in order to be able to look them up, you would cancel the class and then move the students into another date, into another class. So I would come in and actually cancel this class. Once I've canceled it, I can still clone the event. Cloning an event creates the same class for me with all the same items. So it is even showing as a canceled class, but I want it to be scheduled. It's going to choose the same delivery I had in the class. It's going to add the same instructors if I had any. The only thing it doesn't bring over here is the session time. So I can come in and actually choose a different session time. Click OK and save. Create my class for me. Oops, I should have renamed it, huh? So now I have my new C class. We'll call it new C class. And I'll save that. Okay. Then we'll go to the roster. And now I don't have any students in my class, but I want to add them from my old C class. So I can choose to add students from an event. Okay, so I want to add students from an event, and I don't need within the last 30 days. I do need to look up the status of canceled, because by default our choosers and our find pages do not show anything that is archived, canceled, or disabled. And I want C class, and here it is. So this is the class I'm going to be taking all of the students from. I'll click OK, and it's not even going to show me my students ahead of time. It's just going to drop them all in from that class. So at this point, if you don't want any of the students to be in here, I can, go back and cancel them. And then I can save my changes, and that way I have quickly created another class and moved all the students over into the class all at once. Another way that you can have students enroll is to have them self-register and enroll themselves using a training key, which is a code that you would distribute to the students. There are two different types of those training keys for classes. One is an enrollment training key, which is an individual key for each student. The other is an event training key, which is one key for all the students who will be in the class. We have a video available on these and how to use them. It's called How to Save Time with Training Logistics Using Training Keys. I want to thank you for joining me for this video on how do I create enrollments. And I hope to see you soon for another TMS video in our video series.